Hello, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Happy Friday to you. We got some good, fun stuff to talk about yesterday. What a performance by Nolan Smith, and what a, I think, good vibe that created around this Georgia program yesterday with some of the stuff that he had to say. I think we're in the mood for some good news after what's been, honestly, a pretty tough week. So we'll have some fun with that. I'm also going to talk quarterbacks here today a little bit because there's at least one thing that's out there that I think is kind of interesting and kind of what it might potentially mean here for UGA. So we'll do that as it relates to the quarterback competition for the Dogs. It's actually kind of an interesting weekend away from the world of football there, too. Diamond Dogs got a big series against Georgia Tech. We may mention a thing or two about that. And, of course, on Friday, as you've come to expect, a lot of UGA recruiting talk. Georgia making some moves, some big-time offensive linemen. What is exactly going on here with five-star tight end Duce Robinson? I haven't mentioned that name here in a little while. So we got a lot to do, a lot to cover, and we'll get your weekend started, hopefully on a good note. It is obviously raining where we are. Maybe it is where you are there, too. I think we're heading for a nice weekend, though, so we'll kind of just sort of navigate it all and see what happens. Glad to have you with us for it. As DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think it's safe to say that Georgia fans were in the mood for some good news. You don't need me to tell you why. It has been a little bit of a hard week, and yet there is reason to believe, at least from the football standpoint, and obviously there are things in life more important than football, but we're also a football show, so we're going to talk about football here. From a football standpoint, you are led to believe that you're actually going to finish the week on a fairly high note here, on the basis of some of what you've seen from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. Now, admittedly, some of y'all like this kind of thing a little bit more than I do. I'm not glued to my TV necessarily for the Scouting Combine. I'm not going to pretend that I am, but I am following a lot of this stuff on social media. And boy, I got to tell you, I just loved a lot of the stuff we got from Nolan Smith yesterday. And it's kind of one of those things where, like, Nolan sort of dominated the day yesterday because obviously we spent a good bit of time talking about Nolan Smith on our show yesterday because I thought that Nolan gave an extraordinary press conference on Wednesday. It's one of those things, because of everything else that's been going on, it's one of those things that the Nolan press conference almost gets lost in the weeds a little bit. And what we said to you was, hey, you shouldn't miss this. You should watch this. We played you a couple of the clips. Nolan giving you a very strong rebuke of what I'll call like transfer culture. I thought he was good on about that. But Nolan was also just good on a number of other topics there, too. The entire press conference on Wednesday is up there on the DawgNation video channels, including at YouTube. So I think you should go watch it. It's worth your time, I believe, to do so. But then Nolan, after doing some talking, went out there and let his game do some talking for him yesterday in terms of some of the drill stuff that he did and the work that he did. And you talk about eye-popping numbers. This is pretty remarkable. Let me show you this a little bit coming from our friends in the NFL here in terms of vertical leap, the 40-yard dash, and that other kind of stuff. How about a 4.39 40-yard dash? That's first among the guys we're going to classify as defensive linemen, sort of putting edge rushers in there with that defensive line group. A vertical leap of 41.5, that's also first among his group. And then a broad jump of 10 feet 8 inches there as well. So what a day. The combination of the vertical leap, which I believe they were saying was about as high as anyone's ever been at Nolan's size. The combination of the vertical leap with the 40-yard dash, y'all, that is off the charts athleticism. And I was saying this to our video audience before the show began. I wish somebody smarter than me would kind of tabulate here. Okay, so if Nolan kind of moves from where he was likely to be taken and now he moves up to a different sort of draft category, potentially how much money did he make for himself yesterday? You got to think that he made a good bit. I'd love to know if there's some sort of tangible suggestion of exactly how much that was, but the overall thought here is yesterday was a very, very lucrative day for Nolan Smith. And honestly, I'm happy for him individually. I said this yesterday. I think that Nolan is probably on my list of favorite Georgia players just because I kind of like what he represents. I like what he has talked about when it comes to his Georgia career. He's always seemed to have kind of the right thing to say at the exact right moment. I had a chance to interact with him a little bit prior to the national championship game out in L.A. He was funny out there doing that. He wasn't able to play, but he was still kind of soaking up the moment, which I was happy for. But beyond just being happy for Nolan, there was some other really good stuff about the day yesterday. There was a video, and maybe you've seen it. I'm going to show it to you here right now. Now, let me just say this as a quick aside, and we'll get back into the regular topic. So around here, we really try to not do anything on the show that functions more on video as opposed to audio. We take our podcast audience very seriously. I also keep in mind the fact that a lot of you use the video platforms as kind of a de facto podcast anyway. You're not necessarily watching it. You're just sort of listening to it as you're running around doing things. So we are very serious about not making anything on this show a little too video-centric because, like, if I had to guess, 75% of the people who consume this show sort of consume it as a listening product. So we try to be very, very mindful of that. Maybe not 70, but it's more than 50. A lot of people, in other words, kind of listen to this as a podcast more so than watch it as a video. So we try not to do too much video-centric stuff. I will confess, what I'm about to play for you sort of works better as video than it does as audio. For the folks who are watching, you'll kind of see why here in a moment. Video captured of sort of the Georgia football facility, some of the folks in that facility, some of the Georgia players who are just losing their mind over how well Nolan was performing with his 40-yard dash. They're getting excited right before he runs it. They're obviously getting fired up when he does run it, and when he concludes and he obviously puts the good time up, they kind of lose their mind. This is really, really good stuff. There's a story at DawgNation.com, so if you're listening and you want to see what we're showing to you here right now, go to DawgNation.com. You can see it for yourself. But I loved the way in which Nolan's former Georgia teammates, current Georgia players, just exploded in excitement because of what Nolan did with his 40-yard dash run yesterday. This is really, really fun and really, really good. Take a look at this here right now.
Come on, Bo! Come on! Let go, Bo! You straight? Come on, you're right, man. 4-3. Let's go! Let's go! Let's go!
So I can't make out every player that's in that video. I did see Warren Brinson, I believe. Beyond that, I'm sure some of you are better kind of identifying some of those guys because everybody's sort of moving around kind of fast there. But it's a collection of Georgia players. They're celebrating Nolan Smith here right there, and that's just so much fun. I mean, isn't that just so much fun? The happiness they have with their guy going out there and doing that. It's reminiscent of what we saw a year ago when like Trayvon Walker and Devontae Wyatt and Jordan Davis were all kind of hanging around and rooting for each other. And you remember the scene where I forget which two, but they were sort of waiting to watch their guy run. Like they could have gone and done whatever, but they were really wanting to cheer for their guy. They were really wanting to do that. And I just love that. I just think it's really fun. And on a Friday, we could use a little fun, especially after this week, and that kind of gives you that. But if you want to be serious about this here for a moment, I think that this sort of tells you a couple of different things. First of all, to me, this is video representation of kind of what makes Georgia Georgia, and this is kind of coming from Kirby Smart himself, which is that you can have the best athletes. Clearly, Nolan Smith shows you that Georgia's got off-the-charts athleticism in a program, and you can have a lot of different things going for you. But I think that Georgia has come to genuinely believe its players jumping around a locker room to celebrate for a guy who's about to help himself individually, that excitement they have for one of their guys to go out and have a good day, they're sort of happy for each other. That connection, that word you've heard Kirby Smart use many times, that is as much a part of the success formula for Georgia as anything. In fact, let's go back to a moment from this past summer where Kirby Smart talked about that. And a lot of times when coaches, especially when a guy like Smart says this, it kind of comes across a little bit coach speakish, or you kind of roll your eyes because it just sort of seems a little too touchy-feely for what the very physical, collision sport like football is all about. But I genuinely believe that Georgia believes this stuff. And I genuinely believe that Georgia values this stuff. And the video you just saw, if you're watching the show, if you were listening, you got a chance to at least hear some of the sights and sounds of that, how happy they were. Like genuinely, enthusiastically happy that Nolan Smith ran a good 40-yard time. That's the kind of thing that Kirby's been saying for a while, that he has been pushing to instill into this program. In fact, here's an example of just that exact topic from going back to this summer.
For us, it really steers down to one cultural belief, that we have a connection that's greater than our opponent. We're all going to be tough. We're all going to be physical in the SEC. But can we be better connected together? Can we have 1 + 1 = 3? Because for us, 1 + 1 = 3 means we get more together than we do apart. And this team believes that.
So listen, I think that word, that cultural idea, that the word culture, the idea of a cultural component, something that Kirby Smart kind of talked about right there. It's obviously a pretty loaded word, loaded phrase in a week like this. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to pretend this. You know this to be true there as well. Like, not everything that's going on this week is great for Georgia. We just know that. I've said my piece about that. You've probably said your piece about that. We all have our own varying opinions to some degree or another about what's happened for Georgia. But we know in some form or fashion it's not great for UGA, and there's probably some big questions that need to be asked and some tough answers that need to be sought out. We understand all of that. But when you're having the discussion of exactly what the culture is around Georgia, I mean this very seriously. Pay attention to this kind of stuff. Pay attention to the connection that these players feel with each other. You can go out and see all kinds of like scientific research and things like that. We've never had less connection in a society than we have right now, even though we've got social media sort of proliferating through everything. There's never been less personal connection between human beings than exists right now. So if you're a team and can create that kind of thing for the players that play in the team, you're clearly doing something right, and you're doing something right that runs against the current of culture in a lot of ways. So I take that pretty seriously. These Georgia players enjoy playing with each other, and I do take it pretty seriously when Kirby Smart says that's the reason why we've been winning games. I take all that really seriously, and I do think that's a really good thing. And I think some of what you saw at the NFL Scouting Combine yesterday is also an embodiment of the actual culture that does exist at Georgia. And then when Nolan Smith, speaking on the NFL Network after the really good day that he'd had, when he was made aware of the video that of the Georgia players cheering for him and being happy for him with what he did, he was kind of asked, like where are they? What is this? What's going on here? Nolan offered an explanation of that, but then also kind of went into, like, unsolicited, by the way, hardcore recruiting pitch for UGA. Once again, on a week which we could use some good news. Nolan was so much fun yesterday. Here he is, audio clip from the NFL Network. Take a listen to this.
They were in our locker room, man. Our locker room is amazing. You've seen all 3 of the TVs. If you ever want to go to Georgia, we just built a new locker room. We have a new weight room. Let me get my spill on Georgia. We have an indoor facility. We got an outdoor facility. We just put in a brand new restaurant. Let me say that again. A restaurant. It's called Bones. It's amazing. Shout out to Miss C, Corey, our nutritionist, and she's amazing. We eat steak, lobster, the best of the best. So go Dogs and go to Georgia.
How much do you love that? Go Dogs and go to Georgia. Come here and eat some steak and lobster from Bones and great nutrition staff. And, you know, that's a guy that says, hey, this is my big day. You know, this is the day in which I'm proving to people that there's been a debate. You know, should Nolan Smith be a first-round pick? He said this himself the other day. A lot of folks have thought I was undersized, and from a textbook standpoint as an edge rusher in the NFL, he probably is a little bit. A lot of folks may wonder, well, how healthy are you given the fact that you weren't able to play, you know, near the end of your final season in college? You know, yesterday was a big day for Nolan Smith individually, but when he was being interviewed about his big day and when he had a chance to kind of toot his own horn or make his case for why he should be a first-round pick, instead, Nolan Smith used that time to tout Georgia. Instead, he said, let me give you my spiel about Georgia here for a moment. Let me talk to you about why you should go Dogs and go to UGA. Like, that's just really, really fun. And I think everything that I said yesterday about being, you know, very thankful to have had Nolan as part of this program and very proud to kind of say he's been one of my favorites here over the course of the last few days, I feel firmly validated in saying what I said yesterday. And we all know this. It's not been an awesome week. There's been a lot of hard stuff, and we've been kind of reminded of a lot of hard stuff that's happened over the course of the last couple of months, or lingering story from over the course of the last couple of months. And that's not going away. That doesn't completely disappear. But it's also nice to get a reminder of the really good things going on in Georgia too, and the really good vibes that exist among these players, and a lot of really good dudes who represent UGA as players. Nolan Smith is one of the best. It was a great day for him yesterday. He may have set himself up for a very big payday, and I got to tell you, if that's true, I don't think it could happen to a nicer guy. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. We are glad to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. On the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them, the Apple Podcast Player, Spotify, the Google podcast player. I'm always amazed at like the podcast players that I don't even know about, yet somehow, some way, DawgNation Daily is on them, which is always kind of a cool thing to see. So somehow it seems to be working. The technology seems to be working. Y'all are usually pretty good at telling me if it doesn't, but it seems like it's all working really well. So we appreciate all of that. Thank you for being a part of our show. And a big thanks to our friends at Kroger for being a part of the show, too. Now, listen, here is what I love about Kroger, among the many things I love about Kroger. Kroger understands that there's all kinds of sort of challenges out there, right? We've never been busier than we are right now. Things are kind of getting expensive a little bit there, too. So Kroger, whatever they can do to make your life more convenient, whatever they can do to kind of sort of, take a little strain off your wallet, your pocketbook, whatever else, they seem to be really content in doing that, including trying to create some creative ways to be able to do that there as well. You've heard me talk about Kroger Boost before, the brand new membership option coming from our friends at Kroger. Well, how about a new update to this? Once again, a very creative way to kind of help make your life a little easier, save you a little bit of money there as well, because right now you can try Boost for free for 30 days. How cool is this? Try it for free for 30 days, and you're going to save up to $1,000 per year with twice the fuel points and free grocery delivery. How about that? Helping you out, making things more convenient, helping you out, put more money back in your pocket, trying to find a creative, sort of technologically based way to be able to do that with our friends at Kroger Boost. So go to Kroger.com/boost to find out more about this. That's Kroger.com/boost. Try Boost for free for 30 days. Take advantage of twice the fuel points, take advantage of the free grocery delivery, and take advantage of a great new membership opportunity from our friends there at Kroger. All right. We're going to talk some UGA recruiting with Jeff Sentell here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, I want to go around the DawgHouse. I want to change the subject away from the NFL Scouting Combine for a moment because I thought that Tom Fornelli, CBS Sports, had a really good story the other day at CBSSports.com looking at the top quarterbacks as he ranks them for the upcoming year. And I'm going to give you the list. We're going to talk more about the list coming up here in a moment later on the show. Then I want to give you something that Fornelli said about his list after that. So Fornelli, I think, is a good writer. CBS Sports, been covering college football really kind of now for a long time. And here is how he power ranks quarterbacks for the start of the upcoming season with one important caveat. If you are not either a named starter or a very likely starter, in other words, if you're in the midst of a quarterback competition, you are not eligible for this power ranking in his mind for right now. So let me give you the top 10 here for a moment. We'll kind of break down this list fully more later on. But I want to explain why this kind of relates to Georgia here for a moment. So he's got Caleb Williams, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, at number 1. He's got Michael Penix, who did choose to come back to Washington, at number 2. Drake May, who stayed at North Carolina, at number 3. Jordan Travis, Florida State, number 4. Bo Nix, Oregon, number 5. Another guy that made some headlines by choosing to stay at Oregon. Michael Pratt, Tulane, another guy that kind of chose to stay there with the Green Wave. J.J. McCarthy from Michigan. Sam Hartman from Notre Dame. Jaden Daniels from LSU. Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma. So that's the top 10 from Tom Fornelli in terms of his quarterbacks for the upcoming season. Now, in the story, though, that Fornelli wrote about this, CBSSports.com, he brought up a pretty good point that I think kind of sets us up for sort of an interesting conversation. He says, eventually, when the winners of the quarterback battles at places like Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State are settled, it's logical to expect the winners will make their way into these rankings. Being the starting quarterback for a national title contender is a very powerful position. But they won't be in my power rankings until they've been named the starters. That's what Fornelli says about why you don't see a Bama guy on there, a Georgia guy on there, an Ohio State guy on there. It's because those are all players who are in the midst of their quarterback competition. But eventually, he says, it's just sort of logical to assume that the starting quarterback at a place like Alabama, the starting quarterback at a place like Georgia, would have a very good chance of ranking among the 10 best quarterbacks in college football. But let's park on that here for a moment. Doesn't that set us up for a pretty good contrast here right now? That right now Georgia and the team in the SEC that we believe Georgia might play in the SEC championship, final time this year for division winners populating the SEC title game, Alabama, there are some similarities here, right? Whereas at Georgia, a lot of Georgia fans believe that Carson Beck will eventually win the job because Carson Beck was the number 2 guy a year ago. It's at least a reasonable assumption. But in the broadest sense, we don't yet know who the starting quarterback is going to be for Georgia. At Alabama, we saw Jalen Milroe be the guy that played when Bryce Young got injured a year ago. A lot of Bama fans think Ty Simpson's going to overtake him, and actually it'll be Simpson who becomes the starting quarterback for Alabama. But in the broadest sense, we also don't yet know who the starting quarterback is going to be at Alabama either. So right now, even though the situations are a little bit different, Milroe has played more than Beck has. Beck may be slightly more favored to be the starter for Georgia than Milroe is for Alabama. But nonetheless, these are at least somewhat similar situations. And that right now, for the two, at least on the basis of preseason rankings, the two top teams in the SEC, we don't yet know who the starting quarterback is going to be. Now, what I think is interesting about that is that how many years in a row has the assumption been made that Alabama has had a better quarterback than Georgia? That Georgia as a program has built itself up to being Alabama's equal, and now I would say surpassed Alabama, but it has done so without the perception of the Georgia quarterback being what the Alabama quarterback has been. No disrespect to Stetson Bennett. He leaves one of the most decorated college football players ever, but he's probably not going to be like a number one overall type pick, whereas Bryce Young could be the number one overall draft pick. Prior to that, Mac Jones was also a first-round pick with the New England Patriots. Prior to that, Tua Tagovailoa was a first-round pick of the Miami Dolphins. Even Jalen Hurts, when he was the starting quarterback, had a little bit of chatter around him. It has been a great number of years, significant number of years, pretty much every year of the Kirby Smart era Georgia, that the assumption is that Alabama's got the better quarterback in comparison to Georgia, and that if Georgia's going to be better than Alabama, it's going to have to overcome a little bit of a negative comparison when it comes to the overall quarterback spot. Now, doesn't that set us up for something interesting here in 2023? That it's at least possible, and maybe in some respects likely, whether it be a Carson Beck or whether it be a Brock Vandagriff, whether it be a Gunnar Stockton, that it's actually reasonable to ask the question of, could this year Georgia's quarterback play be better than Alabama's? I don't mean could the Georgia team be better, because the Georgia team has been better now the last 2 years. But could the one area in which Alabama has been so dominant, could that now actually change? Is the door open in 2023, whoever the Georgia starter ends up being, with Mike Bobo becoming coordinator? At the same time, by the way, Alabama's also bringing in a new coordinator there as well. Is the door open this season for Georgia to also be better at quarterback? And when you look at that list, let me see that list one more time. And I want to bring the list back again one more time before the show is done. But when you look at the list, how many of these players, Michael Penix, Jordan Travis, certainly Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy, how many of the Jaden Daniels, like how many of these players would it be impossible for you to say, well, there's no way the Georgia quarterback can be better than that guy? There's no way the Georgia quarterback can be whatever. I mean, that's just, I hate to say it this way because these are all good players, but does that really come across as that distinguished of a list to you? Does that really come across as one of those things where, like, oh my gosh, there's no way that the Georgia quarterback can match what Bo Nix is going to do for Oregon? We've seen Bo Nix play. We know that's not true. Like, Drake May is very good for North Carolina, a little bit different kind of situation, but like Michael Penix right now is the second best quarterback in the country, according to Tom Fornelli. Writer I respect. Penix is a quarterback that I like. But are you telling me the Georgia quarterback can't be as good as Michael Penix has been for Washington, was for Indiana before that? I'd say he probably could. Same thing for a guy like Sam Hartman going to Notre Dame, been at Wake Forest. That's a good player. But is like Sam Hartman so good that the Georgia quarterback couldn't be better than that? I think what I'm trying to get to is that I think it's very appropriate to be optimistic about Georgia's quarterback situation. You're clearly optimistic about Georgia as a team individually. They'll be favored to win the national championship. But in terms of the makeup of this Georgia team this year, it could be really fun at quarterback. We talked when I was on vacation a couple of weeks ago about questions related to the quarterback job and who's going to be the starter, who might be the backup. But it's also another question you can add to that list is, how good will the Georgia quarterback be who is eventually emerges as the starter? And I think it's reasonable to assume that the quarterback that plays for Georgia this year, even if we're not quite so sure yet of whether it's Beck or Vandagriff or Stockton, I think it's reasonable to assume that quarterback might be very good. When you look at who he's competing with to be the best in the country, why couldn't the Georgia quarterback rank up near the very top? And when you look at a program like Alabama, who now for a good number of years, it's just been taken as an objective fact that Bama has had the better quarterback, that Bama was better at developing and producing high-level quarterback play than Georgia was, maybe the door is open this year for that not quite to be so true. Interesting comparison here as Georgia, as Alabama, as teams like that get ready to wage a quarterback competition, and where the eventual starter that emerges there will rank among the very best in the country before the season's all said and done. I'm going to have a little bit more on this topic before we're done here today there too. But for now, Let's get ready to talk some Georgia recruiting. There's a lot going on. There was a big camp event last week in the Atlanta area. Interesting stuff comes out of that. We'll talk to Jeff Sentell about that. We have not gotten a update on five-star tight end Duce Robinson in a little while, and I think there's some stuff out there that's at least worth asking Jeff on that. And who knows? We'll see where it all goes. Let's do it right now. It is a recruiting update with Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Let's do it right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So I've got a lot to talk to Jeff Sentell about, and Jeff, maybe I've got the wrong read on this, but it seems to me right now, just for the purposes of where we are, first weekend in March coming up here, the position group that sort of seems the most interesting to me here at the moment, based on some of the sort of rumor mill chatter or whatever else that's out there, I'm sort of interested in offensive line stuff right now. Whether it be Daniel Calhoun out of now at Walton High School, I guess, or David Sanders, a guy that I know you saw this past week. It seems like Georgia is in a pretty good spot with a really good 2024 guy here. Sanders, the 2025 guy, is making some news. Georgia has got to keep bringing in these elite top-end offensive linemen. And to me, Calhoun, Sanders sort of seem like they've been in the news here a little bit as of late. Seems like there's some pretty good energy right now around Georgia offensive line recruiting. Does that seem like an okay place to start for today in your mind?
That, man, offensive linemen are the building blocks of football, the most important players on the field.
Yeah, so I guess what is the latest here? Because I think you saw Sanders this past weekend. Calhoun's a guy we're going to probably be watching pretty closely. What is the latest here on some of that?
So, what we kind of see right now is line coach Stacy Searles has kind of got a type. He's going after very large, very massive human beings. Like, Georgia's had success with taking a guy like a Tate Ratledge. Most people don't know this. Xavier Truss, even the late Devin Willock. Those guys were all kind of seen as tackles, elite tackles, or top 20 tackles, top 15 tackles on the recruiting trail. And they come to Georgia, and they're all about 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", and they end up being guards. And Georgia just has like a huge, massive, that brick wall we talk about, a massive humanity trying to, not trying, but moving men around and creating holes for great running backs like Kenny McIntosh. But it's kind of astounding. You start looking at these guys, and there's some guys you see that they're clearly a tackle, and there's other guys that you say, this guy is a hybrid, he can play this or that. When you see Sanders, man, I've been open with it about this guy from the start, standing up on the table. But I don't know if I've seen 10 prospects. I don't know if I've seen 5 prospects that have impressed me as much as David Sanders has ever. That's ever. He just did some stupid things this past week. He broad jumped almost 10 feet on set a new personal record at the Under Armour event. But then he goes out this week and he throws the shot put like 51 feet, Brandon. A case of comparison, Trayvon Walker was throwing the shot put his junior year of high school, like 48 feet max. And this is a 6'7", 260-pound guy. Could be a 5-star tight end, could be a 5-star left tackle, could be a 5-star edge. He had 2 great reps against the 2024 Alabama commitment, and that's why he's the number 1 player in the country for 2025. Just rare, man. Just everybody talks. We use these phrases a lot. A dude, uncommon, different, him. Brandon, there's really kind of only been one David Sanders so far, a guy that has that much athleticism in 3 different areas. But then you look at the 2025 class, Brandon, the guy I'm going to write about today is Nikolai Brooks at Buford. He transferred from St. Francis. And I always wondered, Brandon, how in the world would Georgia find a bigger, more impressive, more astounding version of an offensive tackle than Amarius Mims? Well, that, to me, looks like Nikolai Brooks. He's lost some good weight being at Buford. When you go to Buford, Brandon, you run about 2.5 miles a day, no matter how much you weigh. And Nikolai Brooks is now 6'8.5" and about 350. Looked very good. Played some guard, played some tackle in the Under Armour event. And he was one of the final 5 most impressive linemen named and honored by the camp. I know everybody wants to hear about 2024s. I think Daniel Calhoun's a name to watch there really closely with Georgia. I think Jonathan Daniels is a guy down there in the state of Florida, top 10 offensive tackle, really likes the Dogs. Fletcher Westfall, Brandon, he's a guy out of Virginia, going to visit Georgia in March. Visits are back on again. The dead period is opened back up. And Fletcher, man, is a kid that might be the most scientist recruit that I've ever seen. Dude, he's got a spreadsheet with like 15 values ranking all of his schools in terms of everything from almost to the way that their Powerade tastes, but a lot of specificity, a lot of really intricate details here about trying to find a ratio. He gives these schools a value score from 1 to 10. He's got independent factors as well that kind of couch things like vibe and feel and gut feeling. And here's the thing. There's no offensive line commitments right now. There's no defensive line commitments right now. Here's the reason. Everybody wants to go to Georgia. Everybody wants to at least check out Georgia. And what Georgia's going to do is they're going to bring them all in June. They're going to work them all out against one another, and the cream will rise to the crop. That's what I think is going on, even though a lot of those guys, like a Daniels, like a Calhoun, there's Papa Afua, perhaps might be the first Polynesian player in Georgia. He's out there in Seattle, Washington. He's a guy that has Georgia really highly up on his board. So there's a lot of names in 2024. I think the big takeaway for me is they're just going to get massive humans, Brandon, and keep pushing the pile.
So you were talking about the Under Armour event you were at this past weekend, and on Wednesday's edition of Before the Edge was presented by Kroger, you also had a conversation with Georgia commit Sokovie White. Jeff, I really like Sokovie a lot, and I know at the weekend event he kind of competed as a defensive back, which I guess at Georgia we sort of think of him as more of a wide receiver. I saw him play for Cass a year ago. I thought he was great on both sides of the ball. To me, he's a really dynamic athlete, a really fun player. So I guess I'll let you talk about Sokovie here a little bit, but also kind of what else you saw this past weekend for what I believe is kind of the first big camp event of the 2023 calendar year.
Yeah, it was. And you have a lot of 7-on-7s going on right now, Brandon, but there's another Under Armour camp event in Orlando this weekend. They're going to make their tour stops. But with Sokovie, man, you just have to like him. You know, first of all, this is a young man that's comfortable in his own skin. He came dressed, I believe, as Woody from Toy Story to a school event. He's dressed up in another huge green get-up costume as well. And Brendan, he really just wanted to use that Under Armour camp as a way to see if, hey, could I really play DB in college if I wanted to? Knowing full well that he's going to be a slot receiver at Georgia. I think the main thing here, and, you know, sometimes you get weird looks from people or, you know, smart keyboard warriors on Twitter when they go, this kid is just a football player. I want to take a minute and break down what that means. What it means is you can put him anywhere on the field and he's going to be successful. For Sokovie, that would be at running back, wildcat quarterback, outside receiver, inside receiver, slot, kick returner, punt returner, slot corner, nickel corner, cornerback safety. A lot of places where he can make plays for you. And he's going to be that same competitive joker, physical, throw guys around. I mean, it was really funny. I asked him a question, Brandon. What would Sokovie White, the slot receiver, have done against Sokovie White, the defensive back, at the Under Armour camp? And he's like, well, I've been in the weight room, man. I've been lifting a lot. I probably would have thrown Sokovie White, the slot receiver, out of the club because I was throwing guys around left and right. I mean, Sokovie is a guy, and I hate to say this, but I know it's kind of speaking the language that gets Georgia fans excited. But you know all those things that made Hines Ward so special at Georgia? I see that in Sokovie White. He says he's 1,000% cut down. He's only going to take one official visit. That's the University of Georgia. He's from Northwest Georgia. He's an in-state homegrown. His coach, Brandon, was a former Georgia lineman there. I mean, everything Georgia, everything Sokovie White. Everybody tries to look for that player that's going to far exceed the recruiting rankings, and that, for me right now, at least for right now, is definitely Sokovie White in the Georgia class.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We haven't talked about five-star tight end Duce Robinson in a little while. I want to talk about that. I saw online where I guess for the first time there is a rating service that's ranking him the top 100 as a baseball prospect. I think ESPN has him in like somewhere in the 80s. Jeff, is the ESPN baseball rankings as bad as their recruiting rankings are? Should we take this seriously? Is Robinson now more of a baseball prospect than he used to be?
Brendan, I don't know about you, man, but let's see where ESPN makes more money and more clicks. Do they do more of it on football rankings? Do they do more of it on baseball rankings? So, I mean, the baseball rankings are almost unheard of. So I would imagine that if any resources from the worldwide leader going towards covering the recruiting of high school athletes, I think it's going to be probably more dialed in maybe on the football side. And that's not saying much at all because they're not what they used to be on the football side. You know, Brandon, I think it's going to be really hard. The chatter, the questions I get is they read things and they see crystal balls. I think the crystal balls out there on Duce are really, really premature right now. I think they're not based really on anything factual. Brandon, this might be the kid. I'm just going to compare it for you. He might make a commitment before April because that's what he says he wants to do in terms of a football thing. He might get drafted in June. Depending on where he gets drafted, he may show up or not show up in college football. But I will double down that the young man's dream among all dreams is to play both sports and professionally. So you can come back to football after a couple years in baseball. Certainly you can do that. I think NIL can kind of even things out. But he also has a dream to be a L.A. Dodger and professional baseball player. Like, baseball has been his longtime thing. He just picked up football when he got into high school. Perhaps the case can be made. I might feel comfortable saying that I think his better long-term future would be in football. But we said before, Brandon, they've absolutely got to get those first-round, second-round, third-round picks, draft picks right. And then when they make sure that they want to get it right and when jobs are on the line, they have to go with guys with a larger sample size, with more developed tools than what Duce Robinson has. But I will say this, Brandon, I've extended my network, I've extended my reach to talk to a lot of baseball guys over the last couple of weeks regarding Duce Robinson, and they feel he has got as much power as at least batting practice power. There's a difference, batting practice power than in-game power. But he's got as much easy power as anyone in this class. He could play a center field, probably a long time he would be a corner outfielder. There are some comparisons to a lot of players out there because of his size. I think some of them are lazy. But he's a guy, Brandon, it's kind of fascinating to look at a player in this day and age with NIL, with Lincoln Riley, with Georgia football, and I guess Texas is in here still, I guess, a little bit as well, that they're juggling all that along with professional baseball and trying to make this dream really work. I don't know if you saw, he had a tweet recently, Brandon, where he threaded the ball between his legs and tomahawk slammed it down. Just a simple video on Twitter that says, hey, I'm still an athlete out there world, and gleefully excited by it. I mean, that's the type of athlete you're talking about. He can kind of do whatever he wants to in college football and in pro baseball probably as well. I think the most logical thing to happen there is I don't see college baseball as a really big possibility, but I see pro baseball and I see college football and him trying to make it work in both places. A lot of internet sleuths out there try to point to the fact that the single A team for the Dodgers is nearby USC, so that's where they're kind of getting some of their forecasting or whatever. I just think it's still all really premature. He needs to get a really strong draft grade to really move things up the needle for him in terms of how high he might get picked that would make him forego his college football dream, because I really think it's a really powerful tug on him to go play college football somewhere on Saturdays, along with keeping up that baseball dream.
So let me ask you just two quick questions on this. And I joke around a lot that there's, I guess, an old adage in recruiting sometimes that if you don't know, it ain't you. And the fact that it seems like there's a lot we don't know about Duce Robinson, which would lead me to assume it ain't Georgia, right? It's like if there's this much mystery, this much intrigue around Duce Robinson, then he must not be coming to UGA, because if we don't know, it ain't us in this particular case. Do you kind of buy into that line of thinking here?
I don't think anybody knows, Brandon. I don't think that, here's a way to look at it is, the dynamic of two sports is something different here. But Brandon, he could be a guy that doesn't sign anything. He could just show up, Brandon. He could be a preferred walk-on because he's got a pro contract in baseball, or somebody could NIL him some money. Like, I think the smart thing here is I don't know if Duce Robinson will ever sign anything with anybody, maybe perhaps the financial aid papers and not the letter of intent. And he might just be the kid that shows up somewhere and is like, oh, well, this guy's now a Trojan or this guy's now a Bulldog. I think it's that much up in the air in terms of baseball. Like, Brandon, here's the thing. He's had a great workout for the Padres. He's had a great workout for the Dodgers. And now he's going to play some high school baseball, and scouts are going to be there checking him out. So he's got to have that stock continually rise in terms of what's going to happen there in terms of his future, his overall future. I think the way Georgia fans should look at it, if he shows up in June in Athens and he's on the roster, then that is, I guess found money is the best way to say that, where you're cleaning out the house, cleaning out the attic, and all of a sudden you find something where there's some cash stored in a suitcase somewhere or stored in a desk somewhere you didn't know you had. I think it would probably be a pleasant and wonderful surprise, but I think most people could kind of feel that way about Duce Robinson right now.
And so to kind of further this conversation, not to get too deep in the weeds, the other day I saw Eli Drinkwitz, the Missouri coach, is doing a press conference. They've actually already started spring practice, and one of the things that came up was Sam Horn. You know Horn, our audience does, the former Collins Hill quarterback who's really good at baseball and good at football too. He's good at a lot of things. But I guess, I only know part of the story, but I guess he got hurt playing baseball. And so you had this situation, I don't know how serious it is, but he's hurt right now. You got Drinkwitz on the press conference trying to figure out how it was that Horn got hurt playing baseball, and Missouri had the potential of only having one healthy scholarship quarterback for spring practice. And as I was watching a lot of this play out the other day or reading about it playing out, Jeff, the conclusion I drew from that is, man, Kirby Smart would just not do this. Kirby Smart is not going to have a hot topic of spring practice be one of his players getting hurt playing some other sport. And it just seems like there's a lot of fashionable discussion about so-and-so playing two sports right now, whether it be Duce Robinson. I know Mike Matthews has gotten two sport offers. I guess Auburn, I think even Georgia has given him the basketball offer there as well. Dylan Lonergan's going to Alabama as kind of a perceived two-sport star. But when the rubber hits the road, at a place like Georgia, you're either a football player or you're not, right?
Yeah, I see that, especially at a place like Georgia. First of all, Brandon, I was kind of laughing. I don't think Kirby would be Kirby would probably be annoyed by the fact that one of his players is in spring training and playing baseball, much less getting hurt playing baseball, especially a quarterback. I just don't think that's possible. And, we've heard on the trail where quarterbacks come through that want to play both, and they pretty much distinctly hear from Kirby Smart in Georgia that, hey, man, there are a lot of quarterbacks out there that just want to play one sport for us. And I think that's the lane we're going to be shopping down in terms of our quarterback derby and our quarterback guys we bring in. For me, when you look at this, maybe only a specialized position like a receiver can go make this happen, especially the college. That's why I've never really thought the college baseball stuff even really worked with Duce, because that's a situation where, he's going to be doing baseball. His path is pro baseball, not college baseball, and also pro football, where he has to develop those skills in college football, Brandon, because I think the young man's only played like maybe 20 games, 22 games total in his high school career. He's had an injury, he's COVID. There's a lot of things that kind of kept him from having full 10-game seasons or 12-game seasons every year. One more thing I must admit, Brandon, honesty compels me to admit that just when you thought the 2023 chapters was just totally Duce Robinson and the waiting game there, Brandon, there's also a guy we talked about this week on Hedges, and that's a junior college defensive tackle out of Texas. And his name, you're gonna kill me over there because he's got a lot of W's and a lot of O's in there. But it's Michael Noachoka, and he's a guy, Brandon, that took some time off that junior college route we're all known with. He's a defensive lineman, Brandon. He's been clocked at 4.76 in the 40, Brandon. That's 6'4", 285 type range. Tape looks great, and he's a guy that's going to come see Georgia in March.
Interesting.
And he's going to take his official visits, and Georgia's offered. And Trey Scott, a man who would know about it, says he can see him in the Trayvon Walker position, playing that role, doing those duties that Trayvon Walker did, that 44 did for Georgia. That's another name to think about in the 2023 class, Brandon. How does that happen? Well, I think we could clearly look at spring ball and see if there's any defensive linemen that transfer out, portal guys, and that would create more openings for Georgia to bring in a junior college defensive tackle. Brandon, he would have 3 years to play 3 seasons. And I know when I saw that film and then I heard that 4.76 at that 6'4", 285, that grabbed my attention as another potential summer surprise in the 2023 class.
Did you say he had taken some time off from football?
Yeah, he did. He had a weird situation where he tried a couple of schools. He went back and forth. And Brandon, this is the best part about this story. He got his first offer December 26th, and that was from Prairie View. And then flash forward 3 months later, and he's got an offer from the national champions, and they're talking about Trayvon Walker in the pitch. And Michael, I spoke to him this week. He was pretty candid about it. He's like, dude, I'm going to be honest. He's like, there was a time when I had my top 5, and like, these are my 5 schools. And I'm like, he was thankful. Because he'd waited so long for any sort of DM action from college coaches. And he had 5 that's like, okay, I can live with these 5. I'm blessed and thankful to have these 5. And then, boom, another 5 come in, and he's like, well, scratch that top 5. This is a better top 5. And then, boom, scratch that top 5. Here's another top 5. I mean, he's a young man that is so thankful for where he's at right now, but he said when the Georgia offer came, Brandon, you know, I don't know how much of your viewers and audience will get this. Maybe raise your hand in the comment section if you do. But remember when we were younger and we were watching those Charlie Brown commercials, Charlie Brown holiday specials, Halloween, Great Pumpkin,
Oh, yeah.
you know, whatever Christmas special it is, and
Oh,
they
yeah.
have the situation with the teachers. And everything the teacher says was like, wah, 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 wah. It was like that. You got it. You know what's up. Well, he said after Trey Scott said you're offered to be lucky to come play at the University of Georgia, and Bob went wah, 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 wah. Then he heard Trayvon Walker, and it was wah, 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 wah. That's what you get when the national champions, the back-to-back national champions, offer a kid, Brandon, who had no semblance of what he was doing in college football this time a year ago.
So I'll tell you the other thing that I was thinking, too, is that if he does end up coming to Georgia, he fits in well with really good football players that have also had some time away from football prior to coming to Georgia. You know, A.D. Mitchell's not here anymore, but he, you know, missed time prior to becoming a very good receiver for Georgia. Javon Bullard's work during the pandemic is one of the things that earned him a Georgia scholarship, kind of fits in with that. Brock Bowers missed his senior season, I believe, there as well. So a lot of very good Georgia players have a period of time away from football prior to coming to UGA. So if that be the case, that would be kind of the continuation. What's been a little bit of an interesting trend for some of Georgia's best players over the course of the last couple of years.
It's going to mean more, right? You take it off, you realize you may not have it yet. You come back, and Georgia asks their young men to try and burn 2,500 calories before 7:30 a.m. in the winter workouts, and they're happy to do it. They're gleefully happy to do it. I love the story like that. You know, I'm a sucker for a story like that, but I know that the 4.76 at 285 pounds would really catch your attention, especially across the defensive front when Travion Scott has already stamped and certified him with an offer that says he's Georgia worthy.
All right, let me do two very, very quick things before we let you go. One of these kind of extending from the Robinson conversation. The mystery around Robinson, does that do one thing or another right now to impact what's coming next with Dylan Raiola? By the way, I am now saying Raiola. Based on your admonition. So I'm going to say Raiola. That's what you say it's supposed to be, how it's supposed to be pronounced. So Robinson, Raiola, a little bit close, I guess. Does the Robinson mystery here mean anything for Raiola, who the internet's been kind of, wrestling with the last few days about whether he would or won't visit Georgia coming up in a couple of weeks?
Oh, dude, he's visiting Georgia. It's happening in March. Flights aren't booked yet, but he's going to visit Georgia at some time. That's on the plan. I've got pretty good information on that. Brandon, I'll say this. I say wherever Duce Robinson decides to go, it's going to be impactful because those two guys have long held the thought that they want to play together. Their families are close. Their fathers are close. Here's a good story. Dominic Robinson's dad, who trains football players, he trains baseball players. He was a two-sport athlete himself, of all things, at Florida State, when Florida State was really good in both sports. He was at the Elite 11, or what's left of the Elite 11. I believe this was 2 seasons ago. And he saw Dylan Raiola throw because Dylan was at that event. And he said that he felt that Dylan was better than any quarterback in the 2022 or the 2023 class. And that was when Dylan was just a pup, man, or just a baby Husker, or whatever you want to say it for the right parallels there or whatever. I mean, they know about each other's skills. They know it would be a dream to play together. I'm not saying package deal because people take that thing and go 90 yards with it in one direction or the other. But those guys are really tight. Those families are really tight, and it would be a dream for them to play college football together.
All right, very last thing. We saw a staff change at Georgia this week. I guess Will Myers, who's done some work at Louisiana, places like that, stepping in for Matt Godwin. Is it the director of player personnel? Is that the title here? It's kind of the recruiting, someone who's kind of oversees the recruiting process, the best that I can tell. So Matt Godwin out, and I think some of the internet chatter is he may even be getting out of the business all the way around. Will Myers in, Will getting some experience at the kind of the sort of group of 5 level prior to this. What does this mean, if anything, for Georgia? Is there a way to make this interesting for the person who may not be, all that well acquainted with what Matt Godwin has done for Georgia, or even who Will Myers is, not the current Major League Baseball player, by the way? What can you tell us about this, Jeff?
Yeah, wasn't Will Myers the guy on SNL too? Do I have the wrong Will Myers there? Maybe I do.
I think you may be thinking about Mike Myers, who became Austin Powers.
No, I thought there was another one. Brandon, how about this? Let's do a quick pulse check on this. If we ask 93,000 people in Sanford Stadium who Matt Godwin was and what role he served on Georgia football staff. I'm not trying to demean the job, but how many people do you think would have known what he did?
No, 5% or so. Probably 5%.
5% or so. Here's the thing. It's a really important job. It's a job that the tracking and the inventory and the search and discovery of a lot of players. It's really important in terms of personnel there for Georgia. I like the resume of this young man coming from because, Brent, I think we've probably seen 4 different names at that position in Kirby Smart's time. Some of them go off to really huge jobs in the business, including an AD position at Texas A&M. But he's been at Louisiana with the Raging Cajuns and really had a pretty good class put together. They had a lot of players that were probably too good to be in their class, that eventually the big boys like Texas Tech and Missouri, or at least bigger boys, Texas Tech and Missouri, and even LSU came and found really late that probably would have been Raging Cajuns. So, I mean, it's always an important thing. You know, if it's handpicked by Kirby Smart to deal with recruiting, it's going to be relentless and over the top and thorough and efficient in every means possible. I think the hardest part right now, Brandon, is the national exposure and the success has ratcheted things up where when a guy has an offer from Georgia and he doesn't visit Georgia, that's almost news to me right now when the national champions have offered, the back-to-back national champions have offered. I don't care if the kid's in Alaska. I don't care if the kid's Juneau High School in Alaska or whether he's in Hawaii or wherever you want to say it. When Georgia's knocking on the door now and they're calling you, they're going to get that reciprocation of attention. I think that's what's the hardest part is just funneling and siling down the players, and now all are really interested. I think, Brandon, back on our earlier topic, I think Georgia's offered like 10 offensive linemen in the last 2 weeks, and almost every one of them are about 6'7" and 300 pounds. They're finding them everywhere. There's a huge lineman in Birmingham, Alabama, and Clay Chalkville, another guy just put Georgia, had him in his top 10. Now they're in his top 3, and that kid's like 6'8", 350 as well. These massive humans, man, it may only be like 0.001%, but somehow they show up on every Georgia recruiting radar and tracking sheet possible.
Jeff, that is very good stuff. Thank you for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. I certainly appreciate that. Really interesting recruiting stuff. We'll look forward to reading a bunch from you over the course of the weekend and the time to come here. And, of course, we'll chat with you again on our program very soon there as well.
Take it easy, buddy. Everybody have a great weekend.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really good stuff from our buddy Jeff Sentell, Kaylee Mansell also calling me out here. One of the things I like to do, I'm a little bit of a doodler, so I'm just sort of scribbling on my page the entire time. I kind of got called out for that a moment ago by our good friend Kaylee Mansell. So funny stuff there on that too. By the way, we're going to go cruise around the SEC here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go remind you that when we're cruising around the SEC, we are doing so courtesy of Royal Caribbean. A lot of you know I just got back from my own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And for me, one of the things I thought was really interesting was how my kids were going to respond to this. Their first time being on the cruise. We were so excited about taking them on the cruise, and we were just really kind of curious, like, what would they think about it? What would be interesting to them about it? And you never knew what they're going to gravitate to. And I could not have predicted this, but it turned out to be, true. That the thing my kids probably had the most fun with, or I should say one of the most fun things, very, very near the top of their list they loved the most, was the ice skating rink. And I mean this both in terms of the fact that they both were out there ice skating every time the rink was open. They liked doing that on board the ship, and they loved seeing the ice skating show. My daughter loved it. My son liked it a lot there too. The skaters would interact with them. They'd give them high fives and things like that, so they thought that was really fun. And this is one of those things you just couldn't have predicted, but it ended up being a big part of the event for them. Now, there is also an ice skating rink, an ice skating show on Independence to Seas. The DawgNation cruise are going to be on in April. That's really fun. But my point in telling you all that is it's just a reminder that the thing that makes the Royal Caribbean cruise vacation so special is the great painstaking care they take to give you the widest array of entertainment options, like a true, Olympic level in some cases, ice skating show, a great choreograph with the music and the fun, the lights and all the effects that go along with that. My kids just ate it up, and it was really fun. It was really entertaining. Hard to believe you're doing that on board a cruise ship, but you are, and then to get a chance to actually be on that rink yourself and skate and do all those kinds of things. It's the sort of thing, we don't get to do that in our regular life. That's not something we're doing on a daily basis, but on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, you get a chance to take advantage of stuff that you almost don't get a chance to experience any other way. So my invitation to you is to check it out. Call my good friend Jessica Slater, travel agent, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Speaking of the Dog Nation Cruise, you can also visit the website she's put together, royaldawgs.com. That's royaldawgs.com. And find out more about the Dog Nation Cruise, whether you maybe missed this one but hope for the next one, or if you still have time to get on board for this one. I think there's still a little bit of time for you to be able to do that. I know we've had a couple of folks join us here really recently, very late. And listen, we're glad to have you. We're going to have a great time and hope to see you on board there for all of that. All right, with that said, let's go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I actually want to go back to something we were talking about earlier. I talked about this a little bit from a Georgia-centric standpoint, but I'm going to kind of broaden this to the rest of the SEC. One more time, can I see that list from Tom Fornelli, CBSSports.com, of his list of top quarterbacks for the upcoming season? Now, Fornelli's just one writer. This is just one person's opinion, but it is a good springboard for us to have a conversation. Now, I want to tell you two things that I think are interesting about this list here for a moment, and then we'll move on and talk about something different. The first thing is there are a handful of names. Drake May, North Carolina. Michael Pratt, Tulane. Probably Sam Hartman a little bit there as well. There's a handful of names that by not leaving the school they were at, or maybe the transfer choice they made, kind of changes the national championship race, right? I mean, we were led to believe at one point in time that Drake May was getting, what was it, $3 million offers or whatever it was to go play for so-and-so school. May has shot those rumors down. But the point is that's the perception that would exist around college football December, January. That a guy like Drake May, who legitimately is a really good player for North Carolina, if he were to leave and go to a national championship contender, he becomes a little bit of a kingmaker, and he becomes the kind of quarterback paired with the right kind of team that all of a sudden maybe creates a national championship contender that could rival what Georgia's doing down here in Athens. But May ultimately doesn't do that. He stays at North Carolina. His family's got deep ties to UNC. That may be why. But that's the example of a guy not leaving that actually ends up being a pretty big deal, the fact that he doesn't leave. I'll say the same thing about Pratt at Tulane. There's some thought here that kind of a fancy pants private school like Tulane, they've actually maybe got a little bit more access to NIL than you realize, so they can hold on to a guy like that. They can't pay the entire team, but they can pay the quarterback, so therefore they do. They keep him. He doesn't go somewhere else. I think there had been some chatter that maybe even like Florida had hoped to get him. I believe that's the rumor that was out there. But ultimately that doesn't happen. Pratt stays at Tulane, and that's another example of a big-time quarterback just kind of not being out there on the open market, which probably affects how the SEC playoff race is going to kind of play itself out here. And then a little bit for Sam Hartman there too. Hartman leaving Wake Forest, probably not the biggest surprise in the world. He's done a lot there in Winston-Salem, probably got his degree. But for one final run at it, why not go to a really big school and have a chance at some glory? Well, Notre Dame typically would be the kind of school you think, well, that could be the case. But this. Notre Dame doesn't have much of an offensive coordinator in place, for Hartman. They went after Andy Ludwig from Utah, apparently didn't have enough folding cash to pay the buyout for Ludwig to leave Utah. That entire thing was weird. And then the Irish finally ended up promoting their tight ends coach. Like, if you're Sam Hartman, you're like, what? Is this what I signed up for? My guy, Tommy Rees, leaves, goes to Notre Dame. Have a chance to bring in Andy Ludwig. You won't pay the money, apparently, to do that. Then you end up promoting the tight ends coach. Like Sam Hartman playing somewhere else, I mean, just for the sake of conversation, this is not going to happen, but for the sake of conversation, Hartman following Reese to a place like Alabama, all of a sudden that changes the complexion of the season a little bit. But ultimately, Hartman's probably kind of tucked away over there at South Bend now, at a place in which he's probably not likely to be much part of the national conversation because Notre Dame lost to Marshall last year. They're just not that good. So I think part of the story as it relates to quarterbacks here for this upcoming season are the fact that the kinds of quarterbacks that could have maybe transferred, paired with a championship contender, and kind of become something, that sort of chose not to. This has been a very weird year for transfer quarterbacks, just not nearly as big a deal this offseason as you assumed that it would have been. But when it comes to the SEC situation here, this is where I think also the rankings, the discussion about top quarterbacks gets a little bit interesting, and you can take the list down now if you want to. There are a few quarterbacks in the SEC, I believe, that by the end of the season, for their teams, now Georgia fans don't care one way or another, but I'm talking about for the teams that which these guys play for, they have got to be part of this conversation. They just have to. They got to be part of this conversation. If for instance, if KJ Jefferson in Arkansas isn't one of the 10 best quarterbacks in the country, at least knocking on the door of being one of the 10 best quarterbacks in the country by the end of the year, then it's not been a good year for Sam Pittman in Arkansas. They got changeover coordinator. They got one more year of a very tough SEC West schedule. They need a huge year from KJ Jefferson. That's a quarterback. That's a player in the SEC that's going to have a huge spotlight on him. Spencer Rattler coming back at South Carolina, I believe, is very much the same way. By the way, look at this. It says, if you're watching on video, it says, "Hey, BA, this is Spence. How about some respect from you? I'm clearly a top 10 quarterback." There you go. So some folks having some fun there on that. On the other side of the glass there for a moment. I actually probably think that Rattler's a better quarterback than some people give him credit for. I've kind of probably touted Rattler a little bit more than some people have. He was clearly very good at the end of last season, but he's going to put that together for a full year here right now. Shane Beamer, a coach that I like at South Carolina, is trying to take that next step, and a big full year from Rattler gives you a chance to do that. Another Spencer quarterback name in the SEC, I sort of feel the same way about it a little bit, is Spencer Sanders. Now, my assumption is, and my assumptions oftentimes turn out to be wrong, my assumption is that Sanders might eventually win the Ole Miss job. He transfers from Oklahoma State. They take the transfer from LSU there as well. They've got Jackson Dart still in the program. But you don't take two transfer quarterbacks if you were happy with what Jackson Dart was doing for you, and Ole Miss, I think rightly so, wasn't. So when Ole Miss comes to Athens this fall, my guess is that Spencer Sanders is the starting quarterback, assuming he's healthy for Ole Miss. And my assumption is there as well that the Rebels are really seeking an upgrade at quarterback play. And for Lane Kiffin, who I've told you before, probably needs to spend some time re-ingratiating himself to his fan base a little bit after some of the, I think, embarrassing stuff that he tried to pull at the end of last season. Getting better quarterback play would be a good step towards that. And Sanders, the former Cowboy, might be a guy to do that with. So kind of fun to think about. And then, by the way, one more thing there. Eventually, whoever wins the Tennessee quarterback job is also going to be a big part of this too. That I don't know that Tennessee is a true playoff contender. In fact, I assume they're probably not. But I also assume they'll probably be pretty tough offensively again. So whether it be Joe Milton, who starts at the beginning of the season, holds on to the job, or a guy like Nico Imaleva, who eventually emerges there, seeing how close the Tennessee quarterback this year, whether it's Milton or the freshman, seeing how close that guy comes to replicating what Hendon Hooker did in the Josh Heupel offense over the course of the last couple of years, that's going to be a really interesting SEC-related quarterback topic there as well. I'll very quickly move on and mention that another SEC team is now getting ready to get its spring practice started. It's South Carolina. I saw where Shane Beamer had kind of an introductory press conference there. And like the one thing that I think kind of comes, they got a couple of guys that are missing spring with injuries and things like that. But probably more important than anything is right now there are a lot of questions about what Dowell Loggins is going to provide as offensive coordinator there. And I know the thing that Beamer has immediately addressed is, hey, we've just got to stop turning the ball over so much. That they believe they could have won more games a year ago had they protected the football a little bit better. Maybe that's the case. But Loggins steps in as an offensive coordinator with a pretty big spotlight on him in terms of what he's able to get out of Spencer Rattler. You're lucky to have him back, coming back here for this particular year. By the end of last year, South Carolina's a pretty good football team. They got two huge wins against Clemson and Tennessee right there at the end. But can you cultivate more of that over the course of a full season? I don't mean competing with Georgia. That's probably not likely at all. But can you compete with everybody else? That would obviously be a pretty big step for Shane Beamer in South Carolina. And Loggins, the new offensive coordinator, going to have a big spotlight on him as it relates to that. I was going to do something on the Bruce Pearl rant from the other day. Very interesting game between Alabama and Auburn, kind of an Iron Bowl in basketball. I think the SEC basketball tournament should probably be pretty fun. I mean, Georgia's not really much of a part of that right now. I'd love for them to be. They are not really. But the Pearl stuff against Alabama was pretty fun the other night. I'll save that for another time. Although we will, I guess, give some. I mentioned our good friend Kaylee Manziel a moment ago. Her soon-to-be alma mater, Kennesaw State, I guess the only school from the state of Georgia likely to make a run towards the NCAA tournament this year. They compete against Liberty for a spot in the NCAA tournament. So I guess we'll all be Owls fans in some form or fashion to see if we can get a state representative into the NCAA tournament. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Also, a couple of notes here. Speaking of sports, other than football, we send some well wishes to the Diamond Dogs this weekend, who last few years in college baseball, they've kind of done their thing where it used to be they would play the Georgia Tech series at multiple times throughout the year, kind of midweek type games, kind of leading into the SEC or the ACC slate for the couple of teams. Last couple of years, they've kind of combined this into a weekend series at the beginning of the season. I sort of think this is probably better. It's a little bit weird because you got one in Athens, one in Atlanta at Russ Chandler Stadium, and then the Sunday affair takes place at Coolray Field over there in Buford, where the Gwinnett Stripers typically play. I think I probably like the weekend series prior to the start of conference play a little bit better. Kind of makes it feel like a little bit bigger deal. The Sunday thing there in Gwinnett should be pretty fun. And I believe, isn't it the same day the Diamond Dogs are also at the Gwinnett Arena because of the Stegman Coliseum roof issue? So that might actually be kind of a fun day for Dog fans in the Gwinnett County area. But either way, we love the Diamond Dogs. We love college baseball. We don't like Georgia Tech, so we certainly wish the Diamond Dogs well as they get ready to battle the Jackets here this weekend. And by the way, also a nice little signifier to let you know that spring is getting closer here there as well, with college baseball getting going in earnest like this. Now, speaking of springtime and being outside, enjoying things like that, that is what the Finish Long Drink gives you a chance to do. And, of course, on Fridays, we celebrate the Finish Long Drink with our big finish, and we like to show off folks having a good time enjoying the Finish Long Drink there as well. In fact, let me give this to you there as well. A lot of you getting stocked up for the weekend. You spend a couple of days prior to the start of the weekend doing that, including the person we're going to acknowledge here for our Finish Long Drink here right now. Stephen Mack says, I know it's only Tuesday, but you never be too prepared for the weekend. And Stephen's got a couple of cases there of the Long Drink Traditional, the blue can that's got the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, and the Long Drink Cranberry there as well. In my neighborhood, it'd probably be reversed. I'd probably have a couple of different cranberries and probably one of the traditional, because a lot of folks in my neighborhood like the cranberry the best. But nonetheless, glad to see Stephen enjoying that. And if you have not enjoyed it yourself, well, this is a great time to do it. Check out the Long Drink online at thelongdrink.com. You can find out the story about the Finnish Long Drink, how it began in Helsinki back in the 1950s, been in America now for a couple of years. Got some great celebrity owners and things like that. It's kind of a cool backstory on that, but it's also available in Georgia right now, pretty much wherever you're shopping. Golf courses, beverage stores, bars, everything else. You can try the traditional, got the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, the cranberry, as we're discussing, Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. Just a great time to try some Finnish Long Drink as we head towards the spring, and a great way to enjoy as we give you a big finish going into the weekend. So thelongdrink.com for a lot more on that. All right, golden shoe today, and somebody sent this to me being funny, but they honestly have really no idea how true this really is. So I'll show you the video, and I'll kind of tell you the story here. This is a video that's actually been out there for a little while. So John Seeks Truth writes into me to say, this is how I imagine DawgNation Daily plays with his kids. And you got, because I'm a big pro wrestling fan, you got this little baby wrestling its dad, dropping the DDT, then using the dresser area here, the dresser and the drawers to climb to the top rope. You're eventually going to see a moonsault, not quite a moonsault, but basically like a flip dive from the baby onto the dad here. And yeah, listen, that is the way I've played with my kids for a long time. So John is certainly right about that and worthy of a golden shoe because of it. Very funny video. I will tell you this. My son's 11 now, and my daughter's strong as an ox. She's about to be 8 pretty soon. It's not quite as fun to wrestle with them as it used to be because they're getting a little bit more, I guess, a little bit better at wrestling because they get a little bigger, a little stronger, but we still have a good time doing that, and we certainly had plenty of that over the years. So, John, good stuff. We will give you a golden shoe for that. I'll also tell you, lousy, stinking Gators, right now they're just wrestling with the idea of can they get a winning season. 239 days from right now, we know this. Georgia hands them another L. It's our Gator Hater Countdown. That's a great way to close out our week. Thanks for being with us on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will see you back here again on Monday. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. All right. Pardon me? All right. Okay, so here's a couple of quotes from Stetson Bennett, who has been speaking in the NFL Scouting Combine as the show's been going on. On the subject of the arrest, he says it was a mistake that everybody is aware of. I understand why it can't happen. I've talked to coaches and NFL GMs. I've apologized to my family. That's who I felt worse about. I felt like I let them down. Let me I want to move on to the other quotes. I'm going to say this real quick. Like, the Stetson Bennett arrest thing to me was kind of personally annoying. Like, why are you doing this? But ultimately, I wasn't really all that scandalized by it. I don't think it affects the way he's going to be viewed by NFL GMs. Frankly, I think it's difficult to know where he would be drafted anyway. So, in other words, if Bennett gets drafted in the 5th round, does that mean that he was punished for, having a, kind of a weird weekend in Dallas? Or does that mean he was sort of always slated to be a 5th round pick anyway? We don't really know about that. He could be as high as, I guess, a 3rd or 4th round pick, could be as low as a 5th or a 6th round pick. I think the Bennett thing related to the arrest has sort of worked because of the fact that it's this really big name guy, and it just sort of ends up getting a lot of attention. Like I don't want somebody knocking on my door at 5:30 in the morning. I don't. I'm not saying it's not a nuisance. It's a little bit of a nuisance, and it is a little bit personally annoying to me that this was a thing that was even out there. But like I am not scandalized by whatever happened in that Dallas neighborhood at 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I'm just glad he didn't knock on my door. But nonetheless, this is not exactly the crime of the century necessarily. But he does speak about that there at the Scouting Combine. Can I read the rest of those quotes here real quick, if you don't mind? A couple more here. On the subject of the All-Star game, once again, I don't care anything about that either. He says he came closer to playing in the Shrine Bowl rather than the Senior Bowl, but decided it was better to train. So there you go on that. And then asked if there was a cultural problem at Georgia with the recent arrest. He says, no, it's on the individuals. I sort of also agree with that, too. I mean, listen, I've said before, don't love everything about the way this week's played out, and some of that I'm probably content to keep to myself. But, ultimately there is a lot of individual responsibility that goes into anything. And, Stetson's absolutely right about that. And, you can only play so much defense against tragedy, and, you can only do so much to help people help themselves in some respects. But there is some, in any time of kind of negative situation, whether it be a super tragic negative situation or just kind of a minor sort of dalliance with, negativity, there is a lot of individual responsibility baked into a discussion like that. And I think that Stetson Bennett's probably right. So I believe that's streamed on our SEC Country page while we're doing the show. And I'm pretty sure the entire thing will be up at DawgNation.com. I should say the DawgNation YouTube page, maybe linked by DawgNation.com. So there you go. A couple things as it relates to Stetson Bennett from his press conference. And there you go. So speaking of YouTube, I'll go to YouTube first today. By the way, have y'all been following the story? I'll say this real quick. With Antoine Davis, the player from Detroit Mercy, who I didn't even really realize this, came very close, this is a basketball player, to beating Pete Maravich's all-time scoring record in the NCAA. Had a 3-point shot last night as an 8 seed in the conference tournament against the 1 seed that would have tied Maravich. He misses the shot. Game ends. They have a losing record. The thought is the career is now over. So he came very close to beating Maravich's record, but didn't. I guess there's also some thought, too, they may buy their way into one of these postseason tournaments as a way of giving Davis a chance to break Maravich's record, which I don't know that I love, just given the fact that, Maravich played in a very different era, shorter seasons, no three-point line, things like that. Sort of seems like to me, no disrespect to Davis, that Maravich is the rightful record holder here, but it sounds like we may be pretty close to seeing the Maravich record fall if they do indeed buy their way into the tournament and one of these tournaments coming up. But it is certainly good drama that he came that close to breaking the record and didn't. Let's see what else. Jay Shipe says, are you filling your A&M void with cruises? Yeah, I guess so. Maybe so. Guatemala Mike says, so glad you like to keep stuff positive. He says there are outlets that peddle negative drama. It's the main reason why I watch your show daily. Go for 3 and 23. Well, I appreciate that, Mike. Thank you very much for saying that. And look, the great news is that at a place like Georgia, and obviously this has not been an easy week. We understand that. But the great news is a place like Georgia that the overwhelming majority of the things that we are likely to talk about, it's fairly easy to be positive about them because a lot of good things happen. Now, I'm also kind of person that has a little bit of a genuinely positive outlook on life. So I'm certainly glad to know that kind of sits well with you. For sure. Jonathan Aaron says Kirby's cost a few coaches their job, beating them year after year. Who's the next coach Kirby gets fired? We talked in our 1st and 15 off the top of the show a little bit about the stuff with Billy Napier. And I don't believe that Napier can get fired after this year. I really don't. But could Napier be bad enough that he puts himself in a real hot seat situation for 2024? I do think that's the case. Because, look, Florida's the example of one of these types of teams that their schedule is about to get way tougher. They have feasted a lot on SEC East teams for a good while. And their permanent West opponents, LSU, so that's a pretty big game year after year. But Florida's the example of the kind of team that, think about some of their division wins. And some of these division wins are wins in which, hey, if Georgia was better, it would have made things tougher. But, Florida wins the division, 2015 and 2016? Those weren't very good teams. And that's really all Florida has to kind of show for anything since the Urban Meyer era. Well, that success kind of came on the back of a very, very weak SEC East at the time. So when you think about the kinds of teams, like Wisconsin's, I think, believes it's one of these teams in the Big Ten, that if they go away from divisions, Wisconsin no longer being in the Big Ten West, it's going to be much, much harder. That's why they hired Luke Fickell as head coach. That's why he brought in, is it Pete Lembo as offensive coordinator coming out of North Carolina? They made some pretty big-time coaching hires this offseason because they know it's about to get tougher. Well, a place like Florida, that's also true. Now, I'd say that on balance, Georgia's schedule is about to get tougher on a year-in, year-out basis as well. But Georgia's also the two-time national champion. They're not going to flinch at that. Florida has played an easy schedule and had losing records. So this is a pretty important year for Florida because they've had back-to-back losing records in conference. This is the last year of what, on balance, is going to be an easier schedule than what they're likely to be playing in most years moving forward. So it's pretty important for Florida. Let's see what else. JJ on the subject of the quarter system. Yeah, when I was in college, I was in the quarter system, and around the time I was getting ready to graduate, switched over to semester. I don't know why that's coming up in here. Maybe I missed part of the earlier conversation. I always liked the quarter system because back then it was like 10 weeks, and so even if you got a class you hated, it's only 10 weeks long. I always kind of felt like that was a good way to be in school. Let's see what else. Jerry Dog Fan says, sadly, Kirby has a few real-life examples to use now to keep the culture at UGA positive. Yeah, I mean, look, the one, as we saw at the top of the show, the one part of the Georgia culture we know is really strong is the connection they feel with each other. These guys like being around each other. They like, they like being with each other, in life. Not to be too heavy-handed here, but loneliness is a real problem. And it's pretty clear that the Georgia players don't, at least the ones we see oftentimes, don't feel that. They feel a deep sense of connection with those around them. Now, there's also been some tough stuff here over the course of the last few days, stemming from the horrible tragedy that we're still trying to cope with from January. And Kirby's no different than any other leader of young men, leader of young people, period, which is, you have to understand that no matter how good you think you have it, that is not a bulletproof defense against something bad happening to you eventually if you make bad choices. And I don't know how you convey that message. I hope to be able to convey that to my kids. Those of you who are teachers hope to be able to convey that to your students. If you're a coach, you hope to be able to convey that to your own players. I don't know how you do it, but if you think nothing bad can happen to you and you're sort of free to make whatever choice you want to make, boy, life has a way of really correcting that pretty quick, doesn't it? Paul Moon says he's only ever been on semesters as a student. Yeah, so I never quite had a true semester run, I don't think. I think we switched over because I think we switched over right about the time I was getting out. Anthony Spano checks in to say, how many sacks did Georgia have last year? And didn't you say they would not win a national championship if they did not have 40 sacks? Yeah, as it turns out, Georgia ends up being about the least prolific pass rush team of the college football playoff era. And it's kind of weird in the fact that, for most of the year, Georgia just did not have much of a pass rush at all. Admittedly, sort of thought that was a problem. And yet, when they really needed to sack quarterbacks, they did. They got after Tennessee and got after Hendon Hooker. They got after even a game in which overall defense, they probably didn't play great. I think they still had 4 sacks, against C.J. Stroud. Is that Georgia performed like an elite pass rushing team in the games that mattered most this past season. Now, I do believe in 2024, or I should say 2023, this upcoming year, my guess is they probably revert back to being a little bit more of an aggressive pass rush style team the way they were in 2021. But thankfully, Georgia was able to find that kind of elite level of pass rush play in their very biggest games against their very best quarterbacks. And, they certainly took on a look in those games, a little bit more reminiscent of what a truly elite pass rush team would be, whether they were or weren't. Anthony Spano says, it's hard to believe that through 15 games they didn't have more. Yeah, it's one of those things that I have to be honest with you. Let me plug in for a second because my battery's low. So I didn't talk a ton about this on the show, but my biggest concern about Georgia throughout all of last season was whether or not Georgia really could flip the switch when it needed to. That sometimes in sports we kind of see this, where I'll give you a couple of examples across a couple of different sports, where how an NFL team kind of has its postseason wrapped up, and so therefore final 2 games, sometimes they're resting starters, they're doing this, and then when the playoffs come, you got to try to flip the switch and kind of go back to being, the team that has to win at all costs, that really is playing for its life. And sometimes teams seem to do that well, sometimes they don't. The basketball version of this is definitely true, where a lot of the NBA regular season is just sort of marking time on the calendar until you get to the games that people seem to care about. The best I can tell, a lot of the NBA regular season is sort of spent not really trying that hard. And yet when you get to the playoffs, now all of a sudden everybody wants to try, but can you really just sort of flip the switch when you need to, and can you be in the proper form when it really matters after having not been at that level prior to that? Well, there was a version that I was pretty concerned about with Georgia. We all know that Georgia at times this year just sort of played around, that it wasn't maybe motivated. It knew it didn't have to be motivated. Georgia was so good that almost any team that it played had very little chance of beating it. And so maybe at times Georgia wasn't all that fully focused. And so what I was concerned about is, not that this meant that Georgia wasn't good. We knew that Georgia had the capability of being good. But could you just really flip the switch when you needed to? Could you just, boom, turn on that light and be dominant after having not had to be that way for long stretches of the season? I was just kind of concerned about whether or not they could. Well, guess what? They could. Because, the version, it's like, Georgia had been relatively, I don't want to say passive, but they'd just been kind of sort of floating around and kind of, getting through the season. But that Tennessee game, man, they showed teeth. And they sort of did what they needed to do, packed it up second half, kind of coasted through the rest of the regular season, and then came back again in the playoff. And once again, they started showing teeth again. And that's just what they were able to do. And there was a part of me that wondered, can you really flip the switch on and off like that? And Georgia proved they really could. So my big concern for them was kind of answered. Let me go over to Facebook for a moment. I hope you all are getting ready for a great weekend. On Facebook, see what folks have to say over here. Johnny Prescott says, any thoughts that those segment problems reported late yesterday resurrect talk of building an off-campus arena? By the way, Ken Holcomb's got some good news. I want to read this in a minute. Off-campus arena. Do you believe that the current facility is a large impediment to recruiting and becoming a basketball relevant in the SEC? So a lot of this is kind of above my pay grade possibly, but I believe the biggest impediment to building a basketball gymnastics type building is a couple of things. I think that Athens is a pretty landlocked area right now. In other words, I don't know where you would build it. I think if you build it too far away from where students can get to it easily, well, you're not going to have the kind of student. I mean, you got to make it easy for students to get there. So it's got to be very, very close to campus somehow, some way. Very, very close to the large contingent of where students live. And I don't know where that land necessarily is for UGA right now, if it was even a conversation. I also think you have to have a lot of people who want to put money towards that. And I don't know what kind of donorship situation you have for that. Because, and once again, I'm probably talking out of the side of my neck on this, but like Athens is a small town. So compare this to like, say, Raleigh, North Carolina, where NC State is, or Lexington, Kentucky, where, Rupp Arena is, or places like that. Like those places can pump a bunch of money into an arena because they can also serve as a tour stop for concerts and things like that. Now, Athens has live music. I'm not saying that. But Athens is not typically a destination for so-and-so's tour, not any kind of musical genre. It's just not a big enough city to kind of be a tour stop for like some big musical act. You know, the circus doesn't come to town there. Whatever thing that goes through the arenas, it's not usually making a stop in Athens. So it's hard to justify, you know, a big municipal investment in a arena because there's not going to be a lot of dates that get filled other than UGA athletics. So you're kind of left back to your donor base or your general athletic fund to build something like this. And I just don't know what kind of appetite there is to fund something like that doesn't really have much to do with football. So, and as I said before, like I'm just sort of speaking off the cuff. So maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. But that's kind of my first reaction to that. I also think at this, you know, at this particular stage of the game, now the fact that the roof is falling would seem to point in the other direction on this. But I actually don't think Stegman Coliseum is all that bad anymore because at this point in time, they have pumped a lot of money into it. It looks way different on the outside now than it used to. You have this really nice glass facade. That kind of looks kind of cool. I think the practice facility that the basketball and gymnastics team use, I think that's actually probably fairly decent, right? I know that, you know, there's all kinds of stuff, you know, improvements, things like that being made all the time. But I had a chance to tour the basketball gymnastics facility a few years ago. I thought it looked kind of nice. And I also think in this kind of NIL age in which we live in now, the idea of the sort of arms race for these facilities, it may not be quite what it once was. You may not see as much money being pumped into that in the future. So long answer short, or should, you know, long story short, at least the best that I can on a long story short, I don't know, other than the fact that the roof is falling, that Stegman Coliseum is necessarily that bad anymore. The practice part of this, the extended practice facility is probably fairly nice compared to a lot of other places. They've actually pumped a decent amount of money in to improve it. But if you really wanted to build a new arena, I don't know where it would be built, and I don't really know what kind of financial appetite there'd be to raise the money. And that is about the sum of it, the best that I can tell. Ken Holcomb says, well, this is good news. He says, happened to be on this morning. This time yesterday, I was taking a 4-hour anesthesia-induced nap. The surgeon says he is 99% sure all of the cancer is gone. Boy, that is an awesome answer to prayer, Kent. Thank you so much for letting us know that. He says, we'll know for sure after testing in a couple of months. Boy, Kent, that is great news. So happy to hear that. I am so happy, and keep us updated on that. But we are so happy to hear that because I know what kind of journey you've been on for sure. David Hoke says it's great that CBS didn't include a UGA quarterback in their top 10. So in fairness, the guy that wrote it said this at the beginning. We talked about this near the top of the show, that he didn't include any quarterbacks that were not named or like very likely to be starters. So no Bama, no Ohio State, no Georgia, the kind of places where there's a quarterback competition going on. He didn't include that. So I get your point, but that in this case is not. I don't think should be viewed as a slight against UGA just because of the sort of mechanism of the ranking, choosing not to acknowledge places that don't have starters named yet. Let's see what else. Oh, maybe it was Miriam that said that in response to David Hogue. But either way, yeah. So that was the story there on that. The CBS dude saying, hey, I'm not including quarterbacks that haven't been named as starters yet. And a lot of people have also, speaking of that, have kind of made a big deal about the fact that some of the betting houses, and there are some point spreads out there for Georgia right now. We may eventually mention some of those. FanDuel, I think, has some of those. But some of the betting houses have Heisman odds right now that include more than one Georgia quarterback, and the Vandergrift number is fairly low. And some people are like, ooh, do the sports books in this case know something that the rest of us don't? I emphatically want to state that no, they don't. In this particular case, they don't. That these Heisman future odds, I don't think should be taken all that seriously, because the guy who ends up winning the Heisman Trophy is almost never among the favorites in a situation like this. Plus, if you take, not to get too like nerdy here, but if you take the implied odds of all the people they have Heisman odds on right now, added together, you're going to get something like 600%. Like you're going to get some sort of obscene total that does not represent the actual reality of who, of the actual percentage chance of what somebody, could win the Heisman Trophy. So I would not read too much into the fact that Beck and Vandegrift both have posted odds right now. They're just throwing stuff out there, and they wouldn't take a big bet on it anyway. So I wouldn't make too big of a deal about that as of yet. Let's see what else. James Lawson says, I think there's something to be said about players being under the structure of this program once they're out. Maybe there's a sense of listlessness, a lack of focus. Yeah, I mean, James, I've sort of thought about some version of that before, where it's like I think about me. I'm a really big believer that of all the things that college players get a chance to have, the thing that's most valuable is like the unfettered access to the kind of training that Georgia provides. These are coaches whose football expertise has been stated by the market to be worth millions of dollars. You're getting access to that intelligence. You're getting access to that training ability. Every great executive everywhere takes coaching pretty seriously, and at least most all of them do. And in this particular case, these players are getting access to that kind of coaching, access to that kind of training, access to the kind of, we talked about nutrition on some of our video stuff a little earlier, nutrition, weight training, things like that. Your entire life is managed, and you are trained to be the best version of yourself. And when your college experience ends, that's kind of done. And I imagine that transition is kind of hard. I'm not thinking of anybody in particular when I say that. I'm just thinking about me if I was in that particular situation. If I went from being, trained to be the best version of myself, and all of a sudden now I'm sort of thrown into the real world, okay, now go do it on your own. Boy, that's probably pretty hard. And, a lot of us can tell the same kind of story of, our college experience very different than a Georgia football player's college experience. But those first couple of years post-college for a lot of us are really, really hard. Hard to make sense of the world. You don't have nearly the same kind of access to whatever that you're around people a ton in college, and then when you get out of college, all of a sudden you're not quite around as many people anymore. So I think that's kind of a difficult transition period for a lot of people's lives. And when you no longer have that unfettered access to the best of what Georgia football provides, James, you could be right about that. You could be right about that. Let's see what else. Randy Hall kind of pointing out that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's longtime NBA scoring record and then Pete Maravich's college scoring record could fall in the same year. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I don't know how I feel about Detroit Mercy paying their way into like one of these. It's not the NIT. It'd be like the lower conference, or I should say the lower tournament than that. Like, is that fair? I don't know. Maybe it is. But, you're playing more games. You got 3-point shot. You got all this kind of stuff that Maravich didn't have. I don't know. I guess in this particular case, I'm sort of rooting for the Maravich record to stand. But maybe. And like Maravich is also one of those guys I don't feel like I know a ton about. Everything I know about him just sort of more like the legend. The old story was, speaking of Stegman Coliseum, that one day the Georgia students carried him off the court. Some people have told us that story is real, that he had such a good game against Georgia that he carried him off the court. But in this particular case, I sort of feel like Maravich is the rightful record holder. If what's his name had beat the record last night, fair and square, then I think he's the rightful record holder. But if that doesn't happen, buying your way into a game just so we can break the record, do we feel good about that? I don't know if we feel good about that or not. These are the kinds of things that I think about, I guess, though. All right, one final spin around the comment section. We're going to be done. Let's see. Talking about, Jonathan Aaron says, with all the stuff going around UGA, it's giving us a bad look. Do you think that Kirby is going to work the dog out of them this offseason for discipline? I think that Kirby Smart and this Georgia coaching staff is going to work these players pretty hard no matter what. I do. And, as far as what some of the stuff from the last few days means about Georgia, what it might mean symbolically, what it might say about Georgia, to me, that's still a little too early to say. Like, the one thing that I'm not necessarily in favor of is we got to establish a zero tolerance policy. And the next person that gets in trouble for anything, you got to throw them off this team forever. I'm not in favor of that kind of thing. I'm just not. I'm not in favor of that at Georgia. I'm not in favor of that anywhere. I'm just not in favor of that kind of thing. Now, I'm also not telling you there is no reason I'd ever want to kick a player off the Georgia roster. That's not what I'm saying either. But, the kind of thing that some people sometimes say they want to do of, hey, the next guy that gets caught chewing gum in class, you're going to throw him out of the program. I just don't necessarily feel that way. That's not necessarily the way that I feel. I feel like what we have right now is the continued aftermath of a very bad incident. And I don't mind telling you, I don't believe that Georgia has handled this as well as it possibly could have. At least the sense that I get is that I don't think it's handled this as well as it possibly could have. But for me right now, all this is a bad incident. And, I think any program is potentially vulnerable to a bad incident. But it's a fair question, though. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says we should do a DawgNation Combine for charity. What's my best test? I guess the real question is, what is my worst? I mean, believe it or not, I'd probably fare better at the 40-yard dash than I would the vertical leap thing. Y'all, my vertical leap is non-existent. Now, even when I was younger, I've always loved basketball. I played some basketball in high school, and I have liked pickup basketball, as an adult. But my feet do not leave the floor. Like my jump shot, the old line, you could stick a credit card underneath my, vertical. I mean, you could stick a credit card underneath my vertical. Like my jump shot, the feet are not leaving the floor. It is a set shot if there ever was one. So the event I would do the worst with is probably the vertical leap. Like that thing where like the little, like the little spindle things you jump up and touch. I'm guessing I'm not touching the first one. I can barely and really can't, never could. How like sometimes you'll slap the backboard in a layup. Never slap the backboard in a layup. Never touch the rim. Never touch the rim. Never came close. So the vertical leap is clearly the one that I'm the worst at. I'm not saying I'd run a good 40 time, but I'd have a better chance at that than one of these. Like, I've been to Georgia Pro Day a couple times. It's actually just sort of fascinating to watch. Like those cone drills and things like that, all that like aggressive, quick action in a short space, not a chance. Zero chance. I'd have a better chance of at least getting my body going in one direction and feeling okay about that at least finish. But that 3-cone drill and stuff like that, forget it. Zero chance. And my vertical leap would basically be 0.0. 0.0. For sure. Like at this point in time in my life, I'm pretty much focusing on trying to get my short iron play a little bit better, trying to throw strikes to my kid in batting practice. Like these are the athletic things I sort of care about now. Can I throw batting practice strikes? Can I avoid 3 putts? That's pretty much what my athletic life has been reduced to. That's about it. Foster Moss says I can't jump over a sheet of paper. That's about right. And I'm talking about when I was younger. Like in what would have qualified as my athletic prime, I still couldn't jump. Could not jump over a string for sure. Yes, Spencer Clark, that movie would have very much been reflective of me for sure. All right, final comments, and we got to go. Let's see what else. All right. Anything else? Let me go back to DawgNation.com and see what's going on over here. It looks like we're pretty much wrapping things up for today. Johnny Surf Dog says, how many 225 bench reps would I get? There was a time when I could have gotten a few of those. A handful of them anyway. A couple of them. At this day and age. That's not looking too good anymore either. That's not looking too good anymore either. What is 225 is 2 plates? Is that right? Is that what 225 is? I don't know that we're quite doing so well with that anymore either. I'm a lot more of an elliptical machine these days than I am, bench press, free weights. But honestly, the weight stuff I do want to kind of get back into a little bit more. But yeah, the 225 reps, that's not looking too good right now either. Randy Hall says I can bench 125. I can probably do better than 125, I'd like to think. But it ain't 225 anymore. It is not 225 anymore. Although, back in my day, maybe a couple times. But not anymore. All right. Well, maybe one of these days we'll do that. And y'all can laugh at how bad I am at pretty much everything. All right. So hope you're all having a great weekend planned. Y'all check out our friends at RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. That's all good stuff, including getting you ready to go for the spring weather season. Air conditioning units tuned back up to factory fresh specs, just $99. You can check them out there on that. Also, AJC, interesting stuff here, including an investigation on kind of what's going on with the renter situation in Georgia. There's been some stuff about that. Also, we told you about the Buckhead City thing. They tried to get that going again. Sounds like that didn't really work out. And then update, interesting on Marcelo Zuna with the Braves, coming from Brian Snicker. Obviously, we're interested in that. You can see more of that online, ajc.com there as well. And 15 fun things to do this weekend, too. Find it online at Atlanta Journal-Constitution, ajc.com. All right, y'all have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday, 9:45 for our First and 15, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, across all video platforms. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.